This president wasn't new to protest, having had to set up some of his own over the years. But what he was experiencing was something totally different, because he was allowed back in the Oval Office where the babies were now domiciled. But they didn't cry, they simply laid there silently on their backs. Democracy to this president was only beneficial if you won. But in the event you lost, then you surely must fall back on protests to guarantee your issues succeed. It didn't even matter if your protesters never ever voted a day in their lives. After the votes are tabulated, then the street protests will begin. Freedom of speech versus a full-fledged democracy. What a fight that could be. The women he appointed, though, and the other Washington D.C. associates he knew, didn't show up to retrieve their offspring. And he can only imagine that they believed it not necessary because their child was physically located in the safest room in the world. But his frustration was slowly turning to upset because in fact these children were flaunting their power over the greatest nation in the world. So calls were made to the departments where the women worked, but the only thing received back were excuses. And the babies didn't miss the cavalier attitude of the women. The women's attitudes didn't please the president either. So against the witnessed experience, husbands, guardians, and caregivers are pressed into service to retrieve the babies. But their efforts are futile as snow blocks them in. They have car troubles or flat tires. And walking is not any better because the snow rises by inches for every step they take. And even though the president wasn't certain the whole world was laughing, he suspected they were, because it appeared for all intents and purpose that the babies were running America. While under different circumstances, he would be right. Many time zones away at sea, a nonsensical vision of the babies occupying the Oval Office is observed on a monitor. A monitor that should not have had a capability to receive the transmission located on the bridge of the New Horizon. But albeit it did view the confrontation existing, as bizarre as that might be, it wasn't funny at the time, because the Russian seamen are scurrying around trying to regain control of their vessel. While the Russians are experiencing their own problems, the rich religious leaders, Christian, Jewish, and Muslims, have donned their snowshoes and have made it to the outside of the White House, where they are participating in a non-denominational celebratory prayer to their individual gods. Unfortunately, the poor are not invited. They are simply the barter intended for hell. After all, someone needs to go there if the rich don't. The president, though witnessing everything firsthand, is as cynical as the millions of other people on earth about religion, believing that there are more bad people in this world than him. So God would take him to heaven regardless of how he acts. Even though the events unfolding should have slapped him in the face, making him a believer, that didn't happen as he called the real and sometimes the deaf Joint Chiefs of the United States away from their golf games. The man was literally tired of using the vice president or first lady's offices for official government business. The Joint Chiefs' function was now to take back America's soul. But ironically speaking, they are the ones that helped give it away. But the president cannot ponder on whom is to fault for his country's decay, because in addition to losing the White House, the losers making up both chambers of Congress have also scattered in many different directions at the same time. The seconds in command of the women, who were pretending absence, were left in the lurch because the insecurities of a lot of these women supervisors dictated that they be left out of the loop, especially if they happened to be a man. And it is more than just the Russians that could have a good laugh, because even the religious views of our world keep burgeoning, which is exasperated by the fact these 48 women are no longer hiding, but are fully fledged gone. The religious denominations present, though, are still growing in size as they stand in full view in the dark and have their own belief on the events as they are unfolding. It is not surprising that Washington has been invaded by the supernatural, because that's what we paid our money for. After all, we nurtured the different phases of Armageddon until they fell into place, and now we will reap the rewards. It is not important how we did it, because God will applaud our effort. The president at this moment didn't understand the full ramifications of his actions, but was determined that something had to be done. What could go wrong? After all, he is the President of the United States, and there is no authority greater on the earth. So his cynicism kicks in. These babies were fed, were diapered, but they continue to display subdued emotion regardless of how their caregivers performed. These caregivers, though, didn't take anything for chance, because these babies were watching them. Another night of sleeplessness approaches, but the president is not in his living quarters. He is standing instead in the corridor leading to the Oval Office. But his mind is not only on the babies, but also on their mothers, who have suddenly vanished from the face of the earth. And these infants are probably the reason behind the sudden departure.